The first project we want to talk about is Southmead, the project we've been working on for a number of years now, developing this 1930s soap opera. Now, just to come back to my role within the council, part of my role is to manage the resource that you may be familiar with. It's called Know Your Place, which we'll look at a little bit later. But that Know Your Place is all about trying to gather the stories of our neighbourhoods, really. And when you set up a resource like Know Your Place, it quickly becomes a spatial map of engagement, if you like. And there's a lot of concentration within the central area in terms of the content that's on that website. And yet some of our stories for the city are out in the suburbs or in areas that people sometimes don't even perceive as being particular parts of the historic environment. So our projects as local learning have been to really go out and explore these areas with those communities to look at what that heritage of those areas are. Now, part of what I'm most interested in has become very interested into war housing estates, of which Southmead and Hillfields are two very good examples of that particular period of development within the city. Now, within Southmead, if you look at our traditional records, historic data for the city, Southmead is, as like with Hillfields, conspicuous by its absence in the data. But I know that there are stories there. And just to give you an example of the sorts of stories we've been collecting, I'll just share this screen here, which covers some of the information that we've been able to collect through our project, our Meadows to Meters project. And this is just from a very launch event of the project where we went to the community to try and gather these images. And this is telling the story of a community that was established in the 1930s, which is really the end of the story from the interwar housing period. This is really the period where the slums were being tackled in central Bristol and people were being rehoused from the central area out to what was then the relative countryside on the fringe of the cities, creation of this new suburb with very few community facilities. And what community facilities were developed in Southmead as the recurring theme in a lot of these areas, the actual facilities were created by the community themselves. And that so happens time and time again through these places. And in a way, that has made these stories even richer as a result, as it's actually helped bring these communities together as we see it from us coming in from outside.
So since 2016, we've been working with Bristol Old Vic and Southmead Development Trust. And we've been collecting stories from people who've lived and grown up and worked in Southmead, and together, woven them together to create a community soap opera. It was meant to be a 1930s soap opera, but the stories from the 1940s and the 50s were also emerging were just too good to ignore. So it covered a period of time, and then it was performed live in the streets of Southmead. And we have continued, that was the first episode that was performed in 2017. And we all really enjoyed it and have produced a second episode that we have written together, and they're all based on true stories. And we were supposed to do, and our third episode was supposed to be taking place in March, but that's been postponed. And particularly we've got, and we decided then that we were going to move to Zoom. And so the performance has been postponed hopefully till the summer, but we still wanted to meet every week. And that actually created a whole set of other opportunities. So one of the things about Zoom is that it does provide insights into people's houses. And early on, I had a meeting with somebody who it turns out is considerably younger than myself. And she was quite confused about, you may have seen these over our head. And she asked, what were these things hanging from our ceiling? And I explained that these were left over from a 45th birthday party, so I've been there for a little while, and that they were 45 records. They were 7-inch records, and she didn't know. She didn't know what I was talking about. And I then, when I had a Zoom session with our Meadows, the soap opera that we create is called Meadows to Meadows. And when I was meeting with all the cast, so we have these very, very enjoyable, quite chaotic Zoom sessions where there can be about 15 of us all talking at the same time. And I was telling them about what had happened, and what ended up emerging, everybody was then sharing their own stories about what was their first piece of music, what format was it in, and where did they get it? And it was a really interesting and an unusual insight into the history of music. So Pete then created.
Yeah, so taking those stories, both in terms of what the music was that people were that first bought, but also where they bought that record or whatever the piece of music, whatever the format was, and we were able to take that information and create what we call a story map. Now, this is what you can see on the screen. I hope I've just put the link to it into the chat box, but I'll put it in there in a minute if I haven't done. This is what we've created as a Records of Southmead story map. Now within this, it clues in the name. It's a map that tells the story. So as you scroll down through this resource, it takes you to the places that each of the people were talking about. In this case, this is Mike's first record, which would have been a 78 at the time, and 1953 in Broadmead. But as you go through here, you get a whole glimpse of where people were buying their music at the time, what type of music they were buying, whereabouts in the city we actually had record shops. And this is Ron's, and then Ron actually still has his father's gramophone, which he was able to put the image within the story map. But one of my favourite elements within here, the sort of stories that then emerge from this thematic approach, is that in this instance, you've got Janet, who is one of the cast members, whose uncle owned a record shop, which I never had heard of before, on East Street in Bedminster. And that is her earliest musical memory, if you like, relating to this shop that's long gone. But we can actually pick it out on a post-war map in the insert there. And what's really interesting, I mean, her first record is the Browns, the Three Bells. But then another cast member had also, even these are people from Southmead, another cast member had also been to that same shop, and her first record was bought from that shop, and it was Love Me Do by the Beatles in 1962. So you have this, it just shows how these places, and it doesn't have to be record shops, you could have taken it for places of worship or the pub or the shop. These sorts of places that help bring people together, and people have these connections. And with the resource like story, with the resource like Zoom, where we can still continue these connections, continue to collect these stories, and then with a resource like a story map, you can then represent those stories to a wider audience, and it leads on to other conversations that then feed back into the performance that Ruth will be working on.
As I'm sure plenty of people are aware as well, Zoom can become a bit relentless, and the idea of trying to rehearse on Zoom for a performance in the we don't know, in the future, can become a bit soul destroying. So our assistant director, Carlotta Matos, had an absolutely fantastic idea recently. She suggested that we produce a 4th episode in the meantime, but as a radio play. So our director, Craig Edwards, was like, what? We're going to do the 4th episode before the 3rd episode? And the idea that So that was an absolutely fantastic idea, and that is exactly what we're doing at the moment. And our original idea was to have a focus on, with Southmead Hospital kind of as the backdrop, but Cher, one of our, another cast member, she was thinking about broadening that out to Southmead Cares, so looking at, caring for the elderly, looking at children's homes, and other ways that Southmead people have cared for the community in the past. And there's quite an interesting parallel. One of the stories, that because we were talking about hygiene and medicals, Mike shared, another cast member, he shared quite an interesting story when he was doing national service. So in the early 50s, he went off to do national service, and he explains how all the lads, they arrived, and very early on they were taken into a shower room, and this wasn't separate cubicles, it was one big shower room with the drill instructor. And the drill instructor proceeded to get kit off, take his clothes off, went into the shower and showed all of these young men how to have a shower. And I found that quite incredible. And Mike was explaining that, in the 50s, if you were lucky, if you lived in one of these then new council houses, then you may well have a plumbed in bath. And if you didn't, then you may well have a tin bath. No one had a shower, so no one knew what to do. And then here we are, 70 years later, being told how exactly to wash our hands, how long for. And I just think those are quite interesting parallels. So we're hoping that radio show, we're hoping to be working with Radio Bristol, and that we will write the script together. A story like Mike's will be a lot easier to do on the radio than it would have been on the stage. And hopefully it will be aired in Easter.
Just moving on to Hillfields now, and I mentioned Know Your Place earlier, and it's a good starting point for Hillfields, mainly because lots of people, and no disrespect to anyone who lives in Hillfields, but a lot of people don't realise where Hillfields actually is, and yet it is probably one of the most important housing estates in the city, being the first council estate built in Bristol after the 1919 Housing Act. And it's the first attempt by the City Council to provide housing for working class families. Before 1919, there was limited amount of council properties being built for that part of the demographic in the city. And this was really born out of Ebenezer Howard's garden suburbs movement. And although a lot of the time when we think about garden suburbs, we think about Sea Mills, which is around about the same date, Hillfields is actually a more wider ranging experiment, if you like, into how the council should provide homes for the working classes. So this is Hillfields here on the map, you can see. If you zoom out, just to give you a bit of a clear about exactly, that is the edge of the city. This is one of the reasons why a lot of the time this goes unrecognised, is because you're right against the border with South Gloucestershire here. And it's between Stable Hill, Fish Ponds to the west, Kingswood to the east and southeast. Despite the heritage of this place being started to be created in 1920, and the first residents moving in the summer of 1920, and on the Know Your Place, before we started any work here, the map was completely absent of points. Now, if you're in the city centre, this map will be covered in little green diamonds. But gradually, which are all points that are on the community layer that have been uploaded by members of the public to the website. But if I now put on the community layer that these points have been created or gathered, information has been gathered through a lot of the work we've been doing here. And it's within this collection of material that you suddenly start to see that actually this is a community that's not this is a very lively community, if you like. There's lots and lots of stories here within this estate that we want to retell and raise awareness of the important heritage that is here. And it's like, how do we do that? And we do that in many, many ways.
I've said this quite a few times that Pete obviously knows quite a lot about Bristol's history, but every time, without fail, put him in a room with people who've lived and grown up in an area and know an area well, and it takes around about 20 seconds before somebody tells him something that he didn't know before. So our original idea with Hillfields, pre-COVID, was that we were going to tell that story together with local people. We were going to shape a performance, probably a street party, that told that story. And as you move down the street, you would also move through time. So you'd come in the 1920s and then move through past a house in the 1950s, up to 1980s, 1990s, and so on. And in the 1920s, one of the things that I've learned from Pete, in the 1920s, in 1920, in Hillfields was an architectural demonstration area, and there were delegates from around 500 delegates from around the world and the country that came to visit Hillfields, and they were shown around by the then quite new concept of scouts and girl guides. And so we would still like to involve modern day scouts and guides to show people around. What we've decided to do now is to, instead of having a street party in a concentrated area with everybody kind of corralled into one area, albeit outside, that we are going to have an interactive heritage trail. And as part of that, there are people, so there's a story from Ken, who was born in the house that he has lived in now for 87 years. And he's got lots of stories. So Ken has agreed that we could take small groups past his house, set him up with a deck chair in his it will be really sunny, set him up with a deck chair, and people can hear his stories. And we will also script other things, so you'll kind of come into, hearing bits of audio performed by different people. And so we decided to have a bit of a practice with this before Christmas, and we're working with UE Masters Architecture students. We had a fantastic group with us last year, and I'm looking forward to having another fantastic group working with us this year. We would like to do a winter trail in Hillfields, and with the winter trail, we would like to, in the lead up to Christmas and working with the local primary school, we would like to decorate the area with pre-war and 1920s style decorations, but also decorate it with themes taken from stories that we've collected about winter and about Christmas and other celebrations. And I mean, it's interesting, with Pete was explaining about the housing in Hillfields, and this being real state-of-the-art housing that was provided by the council. John, one local resident who we have Zoom meetings as well with Hillfields people, though also there are people that are not online, so getting lots of stories as well from chatting with people over the phone. And we were talking about activities that people used to do in the winter. And John talked about having taken out his tin bath and Cosham, which is the highest, is it the highest landmark in?
Only one of the highest.
Right.
Yeah.
And in the winter, they get into the tin bath and sledge down the hill. And that's because John didn't grow up in Hillfields, he was just outside, so he didn't have the luxury of a plumbed-in bath. And also, John, luckily, is not the youngest of the four siblings, because he explains it's a very clear pecking order, and in terms of the one bath a week that they'd have. And if you were the youngest of a family of 6, then that was unlucky.
And just the images that I'm showing, I should have pointed out, these are from our launch event for the Hillfields Homes for Heroes project. And it's just to show the kind of way in which we'd like to try and work with communities, and so we've got actors like Malcolm here and Jess Hoffman, who are who we bring together with the community to shape a performance to take place within the neighbourhood. Now, with what we're hoping that with in the summer, when we do the next Heritage Trail, the kind of celebratory event which we would have held this summer, what we learned from the Open Doors programme, where we actually invited people out to Hillfields to be shown around Hillfields by local members of the community, that the people who are actually leading those tours, community members like Ken and Zoe and others, really enjoyed that process of actually showing people around their own neighbourhood. And actually the audience also really enjoyed that. So what we're going to have in the summer will be the similar sort of thing, where you'll actually go to Ken's front gate and you will hear from Ken what Hillfields is all about, what Hillfields means to him, what the history of Hillfields means to him, and what it means to the wider community. And there'll be other people that audience members will meet along that, but we'll also be using actors as well to help bring that history to life. And
for both Southmead and Hillfields, we are still collecting stories. So if you know any more stories, if you or you know someone that's grown up in Southmead or Hillfields and has got things they would like to share, then we'd really like to hear from you. And I think, are we at the end?
We are. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks.